You're 19 years old and fresh off the bus in New York City in the 1960s. And for the first time in your life, you step into a bar where you don't have to pretend. Stonewall Inn. It's dark, crowded, and alive. People dancing, kissing, touching each other, finally breathing. But then, police flood the bar, shouting, people shoved against walls. Flashlight in your face, someone says ID, now. Your stomach drops. If they arrest you, your name goes in the paper. And then what? Your job? Gone. Your family? Maybe too. Then, something shifts. Someone resists, a shove. A bottle crashes. Someone shouting from the back of a paddy wagon. A brick flies. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it was the fists, the voices, the chant of refusal to move. Maybe it doesn't matter who threw the first brick. What matters is that fear turned to fire, and that fire spreads. The Stonewall Riots wasn't just about one person, just like any movement of resistance isn't just about one person. It's about a moment that becomes a movement, because individual resistance, it doesn't stay individual for long. Welcome to another episode on the exploration of anarchist calisthenics. In this video, we're going to dive into how anarchist calisthenics has shown up throughout history and how understanding this history can help us prepare for the moment that we're in right now.
Katniss, get away from that tree! Katniss, get away from that tree!
Some of these moments, like the gay liberation movement, or modern pride as we know it, or even our rhetoric around the border, all of these things that we see on a contemporary level lead back to past moments where a singular person resisted, and somehow that resistance led to a larger mass movement where people were able to be mobilized and exercise their autonomy. So in this video, we're going to talk about different moments in history where anarchist calisthenics has shown up, how an individual act led to a collective mass mobilization moment, and what was risked, what we can learn from those moments, and how they can help us look at today.
Homosexuals glorify unnatural sex acts. Every arrest and prosecution is a step in the education of the public to the solution of the problem.
If a gay man is caught by the police and is identified as being involved in what they call lewd and immoral behavior, they would have their person's name, their age, and many times their home address listed in the major newspapers.
On June 20th of 1969, at a bar in New York City called Stonewall Inn and raided, and the beginning of what we know as the modern LGBTQIA movement in the US and in other parts of the world began. It's important to understand Stonewall as a flashpoint after decades and decades of state-led violence, of punitive measures by the state against LGBTQIA people, and NYC is a clear example of this specifically. In 1969, sodomy was still illegal in New York under Penal Code 690, criminalizing same-sex relationships. Also, the state liquor authority refused to grant liquor licenses to establishments serving the openly gay patrons, making gay bars illegal by default. State-sanctioned anti-LGBTQ policies made it impossible for LGBTQIA people to exist comfortably in public. And if you watch a lot of documentaries about this moment in time and space, whether it be the 50s, 60s, 70s, in more rural parts of the US or in cities, there were distinctions around different parts of a city in particular, like New York City, where you could go and find gay bars. It was literally the criminalization of certain kinds of bodies existing in public, which I think is wild because we can see the same remnants of that today. Solicitation, I mean, cops going into subway bathroom stalls, hiding in other stalls, trying to solicit people on the street. If you happen to be a sex worker that were carrying condoms, then you would probably go to jail. Does this sound similar to something like what we're seeing today? Eric Adams being able to evade those charges and agreeing to put certain populations of people under the fucking bus. Does it make sense? Does it make sense? Does it make sense? It should. And it's important to note, around 1969, the mayor of New York at the time had a re-election campaign. And so despite maybe small changes or the mafia being allowed to own bars or institutions that would serve overpriced watered-down drinks to LGBTQIA people, that shifted in 1969, and repression against LGBTQIA spaces ramped up in New York City. And what this repression would lead to and look like is that after arrests, after someone would be arrested at a bar and charged with sodomy or solicitation or indecent dress, their name would most likely end up published in the newspaper. Information about them would be put out publicly. What we know this as today is doxing. And how gay bars were able to operate largely is that they were owned by various mafia families, including the Stonewall Inn. And all of this came to a head in 1969, and this eventually led to that fateful night in late June of 1969.
We were in the back of the room, and the lights went on. So everybody stopped what they were doing, because now the police started coming in, raiding the bar. They pushed everybody like to the back room and slowly asking for IDs. Meanwhile, there was crowds forming outside the Stonewall, wanting to know what was going on.
We were talking about the revolution happening, and we were walking up 7th Avenue, and we were thinking that it was either Black Panthers or the Young Lords are going to start it. And we turned the corner from 7th Avenue onto Christopher Street, and we saw the paddy wagon pull up there. And some people came out and being very dramatic, throwing their arms up in a V, as the victory sign.
I could see the Stonewall sign, and I started to see some activity in front. So I run down there, and as I'm looking around to see what's going on, police cars, different things happening, it's getting bigger by the minute. And the people coming out weren't going along with it so easily.
A rather tough lesbian was busted in the bar, but when she came out of the bar, she was fighting the cops and was trying to get away.
Things started off small, but there was an energy that began to flow through the crowd.
People were screaming, pig, copper. People started throwing pennies.
And then everybody started to throw pennies. This is what they were, nothing but copper. Coppers, that's what they were worth.
And a lot of the different accounts that you hear that LGBTQIA people were used to various forms of repression. You hear how people would sometimes go stealth in order to protect their identities in terms of their gender expression. You hear about the different subversive ways that gay and queer and LGBTQIA people would have to find each other, like going to the meat truck section of the city and woo-hooing in a truck, or going to the movie theaters and going to the DVD shops. And I think what is so interesting and beautiful when we really dig into Stonewall is to see that despite a community being so criminalized and repressed, they still fought to have social spaces, spaces of intimacy, spaces of love, of fucking, of desire, and how all of this led to Stonewall, where the police came in, the lights flashed on, they started asking everyone for their IDs, a big part of the repression of LGBTQIA people. And I think one of the big points of a contention with Stonewall is who actually threw the first brick. Don't even want to put it lightly how intense it is to be in a situation where there are lots of police. The police have batons and wooden clubs, and it was very common for, if you were running from police because they were accusing you of solicitation or whatever, they would just follow you and sometimes beat your ass and arrest you, or sometimes they just beat you up and leave you on the side of the street. And so the level of anti-fascism, the level of readiness, the level of rage that had to be there for people to say, fuck this, we're not showing you our IDs, we're not allowing you to harass us, and this is going to end right now. And I think that takes a lot of power. I think it takes a lot of checking in with each other, a lot of community care. I mean, I imagine people were de-arresting each other. I imagine that people were forming lines against the police. People were avoiding being kettled. All of the things that being a part of a street mobilization or street revolt requires probably happened during Stonewall. And whether or not it was an individual act, I think does matter to some degree, but I look at Stonewall as a collection of a number of individual acts, a collection of moments where people looked at each other, checked in with each other, gave each other that look where it's like, do you know what's about to go down? I know what's about to go down. Hope you're fucking ready. The Stonewall Riots did lead to tangible changes and shifts in the near future. In 1970, on the 1-year anniversary of the riots, the first gay pride march happened in New York City. Even where I'm from, my home, like the city that I live in right now, Columbus, Ohio, a number of years ago, a bunch of black folks protested a corporate pride in the name of a black man that was killed by police, and they were brutalized. And that became like a flashpoint in my local community about how local pride is co-opted, how Pride Month has been largely sucked into capitalism. The normie gays are against the queer gays, and the queerdos are against the gays. And so we see manifestations of this history today and people trying to get back to a more radical and subversive route when it comes to pride. Also out of the Stonewall Riots, there was the formation of some key LGBTQIA organizations. There was the Gay Liberation Front, and as I mentioned earlier, Street Trans Action Revolutionaries.
Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Sylvia Rivera. I'm co-founder of Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, which is now Street Transgender Action Revolutionaries. And my co-founder was Marsha P. Johnson.
What about the issues of that there's a lot of organizations that have included T in their bill, like lesbian, gay, bi, and trans? Is there real inclusiveness, or is it just a smokescreen? How do you feel about that?
No, that's the bottom line. It's a big smokescreen. This movement has become so capitalist. It is a capitalist movement. I see this movement becoming a straight gay movement that only believes in that almighty dollar. Now, what kind of logic is this? I don't understand. We do not owe the straight community a damn thing, so why should we be giving them our money? I feel highly offended. So what is the purpose of us, not us, because this is no longer my pride. I gave them their pride, but they have not given me mine. But what is the purpose of them celebrating their pride and giving straight people who still really don't accept the community, the gay and lesbian community, for what they are, but they want that almighty dollar of ours?
These groups provided political organizing. STAR especially really innovated what mutual aid could look like in the 70s in terms of crowdfunding and sharing resources and helping people get clothes and really supporting the trans community in ways that I don't think a lot of organizations had seen in the past. I want to take us to another chapter in history that is also very well known, but has bits of it that I think are murky. And this begins in 1955, not in New York City, but on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And if you're thinking of a name, you probably know who I'm talking about. Before Rosa Parks, there was Claudette Colvin, a 15-year-old that learned in a history class about the injustices that Black folks were facing and decided to not give up her seat and set the precedent, and what Rosa Parks eventually did, and the Montgomery Bus Boycotts. On March 2nd, 1955, Claudette was coming home from school in Montgomery, Alabama. A smart kid with a rebellious streak, Claudette dreamed of being an attorney or maybe the president of the U.S. Still, though, growing up poor and Black in Alabama, her dreams of a future as a civil rights fighter seemed a long way away. So she boarded the bus home, walked to the back, and took a seat in the colored section. The back of the bus was a fact of life for Claudette. Segregation was law. It was in school, churches, theaters. Hell, she'd not even been able to try her shoes on before buying them because she'd bought them from a white store. But a fire was starting to burn in Claudette. 3 years earlier, police had descended onto her school when they arrested fellow student Jeremiah Reeves. The 16-year-old black boy was charged with raping a white woman. Jeremiah claimed innocence, that it was consensual, but it didn't matter. Either way, it was an interracial relationship. For Jeremiah, it took an all-jury less than a half an hour to find the teen guilty, and 6 years later, he was executed. Claudette watched Jeremiah's arrest from her classroom window. She saw his countless fruitless legal appeals, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and the whole NAACP fighting for his freedom that never came. So when Claudette sat in her seat that day in 1955 and refused to get up, she was thinking about Jeremiah. The white students on the bus turned on Claudette, shouting, ordering her to get up. One of the black students shot back, "Well, she don't have to do nothing but stay black and die." When the police boarded the bus, Claudette argued that she had paid her fare. Her right to her seat was hers. Constitutional right, she said. They didn't care. The police dragged the 11th grader off the bus. She was beaten and arrested. Then the teen was taken, frightened and alone, to the city jail. Later that night, Claudette was bailed out. She'd been charged with disorderly conduct, which meant she'd violated segregation laws, and she was also booked for assault and battery, thanks to a small scratch on an officer obtained while dragging Claudette off the bus.
The same people who came to Miss Punk's rescue 9 months later came to Claudette's rescue and had meetings with city officials and bus company officials with an effort to try to get them to do something. They promised that conditions would improve, but they didn't. We later found out that Mary Louise Smith was arrested in October. She was also a minor. We didn't find out about her situation until after Mrs. Parks was arrested.
Rosa Parks was the secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP. She'd already spent decades as an activist, boots on the ground, helping people in unjust cases, organizing local civil rights movement, and helping black teens who found themselves entangled in a whole heap of trouble, just like Claudette. 2 weeks after Claudette made her stand on the bus, Rosa got in contact. She'd invited Claudette to come and tell her story to a local youth group that Rosa ran. She did, and soon enough, Claudette was the secretary of that group. But eventually, everything changed. Claudette fell pregnant. This is why I love history. This is why I love history. You dig into one little thing and you're like, oh, what the fuck? The way they teach is all of these things is mixed up. Rosa Parks is over here. Claudette Colvin is over here. Did anyone ever fucking tell us in school that Rosa Parks reached out to Claudette and tried to help her, and then because of colorism and the fact that Claudette became pregnant, that the NAACP decided to not really push her case? Like, it's just literally wild to me. It's wild to me that this is a part of history that we don't talk about. At 15, Claudette was considered too young in a lot of ways to deal with the ongoing battles of this trial and the public pressure. And Rosa Parks, in contrast, was 42, a light-skinned woman, respected by her community in many ways. Social standing. Colvin came from a poor background, while Rosa was seen as more middle class and more palatable to many audiences. There's a really great video on the Montgomery Bus Boycotts where folks are being interviewed. Someone who knew Rosa Parks specifically talks about the things that were going through her mind when she chose not to give up her seat.
When Rosa Parks, that December evening, is asked to get up out of her seat, she says she thinks about Emmett Till. Till was the young man from Chicago who'd come to Mississippi to visit his uncle and was lynched for making a comment to a white woman.
Rosa Parks had been a longtime community organizer since 1943. Claudette Colvin was a teenager who was deeply invested in law and civil rights and thinking about the ways that we could change our circumstances around the things that are happening to us. If we look at history as moments where someone suddenly said, oh my God, I'm going to change history and this is it, this is my moment. No. As I've said before, it's a continuum where oftentimes in a moment of resistance, I think it's very important to realize that a lot of people either react and that reaction is a part of a built-in system that you've like cultivated for yourself, or you have a very clear frame of reference, something that is in your mind that is making it impossible for you to be complicit, that is making it impossible for you to have your dignity taken away. And a lot went into the NAACP moving in and making this bus boycott happen. Initially, it was said that it was only supposed to be a few days, and then a meeting happened at Holt Street Baptist Church where community members gathered, and being so inspired by what Rosa Parks did, and eventually what Claudette had done, and the ability of the NAACP and SNCC to come in and to mobilize and organize people, the community voted and they said, let's fucking run this shit longer, because they looked at the context of the situation that they were in. That in their particular area of the South, 75% of the people that rode public transit were Black. 75%. And so when these boycotts happened, they had to organize carpools and different ways of carpooling to evade state surveillance and state repression. People had to get their kids to school. People had to never act resistance. The civil rights attorney Fred Gray filed the federal lawsuit Browder versus Gale, challenging the constitutionality of bus segregation laws. Claudette Colvin was a key plaintiff and a star witness in the case. The lawsuit ultimately Black women push this forward. I think it's amazing that Black women were trained and really passionate and committed to doing things that could help the community as a whole. This is a thread throughout Black history of Black women understanding the collective obstacles against us and choosing to act on an individual level in accordance with those collective struggles. And next, we're going to go back in time a little bit to another moment in history that is a clear expression of anarchist calisthenics. We're going to read from a new book that I've been checking out called Ringside to a Seat, Ringside Seat to a Revolution, An Underground Cultural History of El Paso and Juarez, 1893 to 1923. And this text is by David Durando Ramo. And if you haven't checked out my video on why the US is fascist, check it out, because I'm going to play a little bit of that here. Instance that I want to talk about is the 1917 Bath Riots and the entire context around that related to the US-Mexican border. Look at the US's xenophobic policies. We can see that one specifically led to inspiring some of the policies of Adolf Hitler's administration and the Holocaust, and that is the gasoline baths of 1917. The 1917 gasoline baths at the US-Mexican border were part of a disturbing public health campaign launched by American officials to prevent the spread of diseases, as they say, like typhus. Quotation. You know how I'm putting quotations up? This is why they said they did gas baths. This process involved using noxious gases such as gasoline and kerosene to delouse Mexican immigrants crossing the border. The treatments were not only degrading but also dangerous, as evidenced by a tragic incident in 1916 where a fire at the El Paso City Jail caused by a lit cigarette someone was lighting a cigarette during gasoline baths. One of the workers in there lit a cigarette during one of these gas baths, resulting in the death of 27 people. This incident led to the infamous Bath Riots of January 28, 1917, where Carmela Torres, a 17-year-old Mexican maid, refused to undergo the disinfection process. Her protests quickly... In the rest of the United States, the historical narratives that reach the mainstream have become more inclusive, but you get a sense that the really good stories are being told in black and white. In other words, about white America and Black America. Take many of the historical documentaries shown on public television these days, whether they're about jazz or the Civil War or Jack Johnson. These stories they tell are about African Americans and European Americans, and they're inextricably intertwined. They go to the very heart of the mainstream American narrative. It's understandable why filmmakers and historians choose a dichromatic approach to the past. The stark contrast between black and white makes both for great photography and fascinating history. But it's not the whole picture. Most educated Americans have heard of the Harlem Renaissance, but how many of them are aware of the cultural renaissance El Paso experienced during the Mexican Revolution? It's important to give some context about this period of time. 1917 was near the end of the Mexican Revolution. The Mexican Revolution from 1910 to 1920 led to widespread instability, prompting a significant migration of Mexicans to the U.S., especially to the Southeast. Between 1910 and 1930, the Mexican immigrant population in the U.S. tripled from 200,000 100,000 to 600,000. I see parallels with Trump and his xenophobia and calling certain countries shithole countries and criminalizing people from Central and South America and having stricter border policies that literally leads to the dehumanization of people. Once again, it's like making this video, I'm like, history is not history. These moments in the past are not things that just happen and we forget about them. There are people still alive that remember these gas baths. There are people still alive who understand the terror of what happened. And to read you a little bit from a ringside seat to the revolution, at 7:30 a.m. on January 28, 1917, when Carmelita was asked by the customs officials at the bridge to get off the trolley, take a bath, and be disinfected with gasoline, she refused. Instead, Carmelita got off the electric streetcar and convinced 30 other female passengers to get off with her and demonstrate their opposition to this humiliating process. By 7:30 a.m., more than 200 Mexican women had joined her and blocked all traffic into El Paso. By noon, the press estimated their numbers as several thousand. The demonstrators marched as a group toward the disinfection camp to call out those who were submitting themselves to the humiliation of the delousing process. When immigration and public health service officials tried to disperse the crowd, the protesters hurled bottles, rocks, and insults at the Americans. A customs inspector was hit in the head. Fort Bliss commander General Bell ordered his soldiers to the scene, but the women jeered at them and continued their street battle. The Amazons, the newspapers reported, struck Sergeant G.M. Peck in the face with a rock and cut his cheek. The protesters lay down on the tracks in front of the trolley cars to prevent them from moving. When the streetcars were immobilized, the women wrenched the motor controllers from the hands of the motormen. One of the motormen tried to run back to the American side of the bridge. 3 or 4 rioters clung to him while he tried to escape. They pummeled him with all their might and gave him a black eye. Another motorman preferred to hide from the Mexican women by running into a Chinese restaurant on Avenida Juarez. Cardencista General Francisco Murguia showed up with his death troops to quell the female riot. Murguia's cavalry, known as El Escuadrón de la Muerte, was rather intimidating. They wore insignias bearing a skull and crossbones and were known for taking no prisoners. General Murguia's nickname was Pancho Mecates, for his habit of hanging hundreds of Vilista prisoners from mecate ropes along the telephone poles leading to Juarez. The death troops brought their own military band. It was the same band that had played Verdi's Aida during a previous execution of 3 men caught selling ammunition to the Vilistas. The cavalrymen drew out their sabers and pointed them at the crowd, but the women were not frightened. They jeered, hooted, and attacked the soldiers. The soldiers were powerless, the El Paso Herald reported. Out of all of these events, I'm so inspired by this one. I'm so inspired that a 17-year-old rose up. I'm so inspired that all these other women were like, hell yeah, fuck yeah. We're not... The idea that women were supporting each other, gathering around the 17-year-old, fucking this shit up, throwing rocks. I'm getting chills right now. And to read history and to understand that there's history that connects us to moments where people individually and tangibly resisted, and how that individual resistance became legible to other people. And because of what was created in that space, through spontaneity, through organizing, through tactics, through de-arresting, through forming a line, through having a hard blockade, soft blockade, all of these things that are tactical and felt and learned and understood, they were exercised in that moment. And of course, these gas baths continued, and the xenophobia around the border shifted and is manifested in numerous ways. And even last year, I had my own experience doing humanitarian aid work at the U.S.-Mexican border and learning a lot, especially as a Black body in this country, and learning about the solidarity that I want to have with other Spanish-speaking folks and people from Central and South America. This history matters. And so if you haven't read or checked out A Ringside Seat to Revolution, I would consider checking it out. I'll put a link to it in the description. And I want to end this video by centering us on the fact that in all of these instances that I explored, an individual on some level was a flashpoint for other people around them.
I'd understand if you're thinking about it. In a way, you got something to go back for. Jim and all. Jim is not an option. But, I don't know, something's like crossed over in me, and I can't go back. I mean, I just couldn't live.
But the fact that an individual can lead to a space or a group of people being more ready and compelled to resist is powerful. And I've felt this at different points in my life, and I've talked about it on this channel. When I interrupted a Bill Clinton speech in 2016, I tried to get other people to join me. Granted, no one did, but it was a powerful enough act of resistance for me. And I remember I did that because I had a friend in Seattle that also interrupted and jeered at Bill Clinton when he was like in a restaurant, and I saw them post a video about it, and that individual act inspired me. That same year when I went to Standing Rock, and I ended up going there for the first time for about a week and a half, and I got back to my college town, and I talked to as many people as possible and spread the word and let people know like this movement is happening, and if you have the time and space, you should go. Anarchist calisthenics isn't about just us like getting more for ourselves or hoarding our own resources. Ideally, as these moments throughout history show, the continuum, the radical continuum that leads to things shifting in your life and in your community is when we use individual acts of resistance to inspire other people to resist as well. When we use our voice, our physicality, our tactics, our histories, our anger, our justifiable rage, we can begin to change history as we know it. That individual action helps us challenge what we believe we are individually capable of. As a Black queer person, there's been so many times in my life where I've told myself, maybe you just shouldn't be doing this shit. Maybe it's white people shit. And sometimes it is white people shit. And sometimes it's just radical shit. And then next, collective action shows us that so much more is possible when we work together. We're able to actually protect and care for each other to show our capacity for human care. These stories, whether it be Stonewall, the Bath Riots, or the Montgomery Bus Boycott, they're not just history, they're lessons. They're unfinished confrontations. Every system that was challenged in these moments, whether it be violent policing, the racist border policies, economic exploitation, sexual and gender violence, all of it is still here, just wearing different uniforms. The police still raid queer spaces, from bars to pride events to encampments where unhoused trans youth gather for safety. The border still treats migrants like contaminants, exposing bodies to surveillance, violence, and dehumanization. Black people are still being criminalized for taking up space, whether it be sitting on a bus, walking through a neighborhood, or loitering outside of a store. Every act of defiance I've talked about in this video wasn't the end of something. It was a practice run for exactly what we're living through right now. The lesson of anarchist calisthenics isn't just about what one person can do in the face of injustice. It's about how one act can spark something much, much larger, something collective. Something that shifts what's possible. The question isn't whether you would throw the first brick at Stonewall. The question is, when the next raid comes, or when the next ICE agent comes, or when the cop knocks on your neighbor's door, when the next moment of injustice is right in front of you, what will you do? What are you prepared to do? And what do you want to prepare those around you to do as well?
So I don't think it matters who threw the first bottle or who threw the first anything. You know, I think what matters is that a community came together to say, stop it. You know, I think that's what matters. You know, it's not the 7 people that were arrested or as many, I don't know how many, or the first bottle that was thrown or the first curse that was said. I think it was that a community came together, you know, saying that this needs to stop. You know, this needs to, you know, we need to be who we are. That the harassment has to stop. The arrests have to stop. The beatings have to stop by the police officers. I think that's what matters in history, that a community came together.
Thank you for making it to the end of another video. I just wanted to record a little outro message and say thank you to everyone that's been watching my channel lately. I know these anarchist calisthenics videos have been coming out week after week after week, and it's because I'm trying to keep up the momentum. I'm trying to just explore these ideas because as a writer, as a freelance journalist, it's interesting how those skills translate to these videos. So I just want to thank folks because as of the time that I'm recording this right now, I'm almost at 30,000 subscribers, which to me is just mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. I really hope y'all are getting a lot from these videos. Check out the description for more resources. If you want to sign up for a free monthly newsletter, head to my Patreon and sign up there for free. And if you find these videos helpful, send them to your friends, comment, like. Another thing that's really great is if you click the notify button when you subscribe, because that lets you know exactly when my new videos are coming out, and that helps me in the algorithm. So please do that. And I wanted to give you a little preview of a video that I'm working on that I am so fucking excited for. If you followed me last year, you know that I really dug into Billy Porter and the whole biopic about James Baldwin. But this year, I have a new celebrity that I'm going to be digging into. So here's a little preview of an up-and-coming video called The Kardashians or the KKK. Kim Kardashian didn't just become famous. She manufactured a cultural empire by rewriting the rules of whiteness. From her sex tape to the writer's strike of 2007, from dating black men to co-opting aesthetics that don't belong to her, every move has been strategic. But what if I told you that her rise wasn't just about luck or reality TV? It was about exploitation, timing, and the rebranding of white femininity for profit. This is the story of how the Kardashians didn't just survive America's changing and media landscape, they mastered it. And the consequences are much bigger than you think.